Welcome to Daf Yomi, 1 week at a time. This is Masechet Bava. Today is our 8th class, and we are going to be reviewing Daf 51 through 57. So Daf 51 tells us that a woman is not allowed to make a Chazaka on her husband's field because she's allowed to eat from those fields. If you remember, we learned that a husband is required to provide food for his wife. And even if he designated another field for her food, she cannot claim that she has been on the field for 3 years and therefore it's her own field. However, if she has proof that the field is hers, so then it's valid. He can't say that he only sold it to her, meaning the husband can't say that he only sold it to the wife to get his money back, because it seems that maybe she took his money and he said, you know what, give me the money, I'll give you the field. Or maybe he can claim that the only reason that he sold the field to her was so that he can get his money back. And therefore, if she has proof that he gave it to her as a gift, then it's definitely valid, because again, there would be no ulterior motive for him to give it as a gift, and it must be that it's a real gift, and the field, it does belong to her. It is a valid sale to sell the field, to sell a field to the wife, and a document is enough of a valid proof to prove that she bought the field. Or maybe it's not only that she has the document, but she also has to show that she paid the money as well. Or maybe the document is enough for a sale, or maybe a document is enough only for a gift. Again, maybe it depends on what the field is. If it's a very poor field, but maybe if it's a regular field, you need to have paid for the field and write a document that you bought the field. If the husband wants to give a gift, he can write to the person that he wants to give the gift to. He can write it as if it was a sale, because this is a stronger acquisition, right? No one is going to take it away if it was sold to the person. Rather, if it was a gift, it might get taken away if there are creditors. If a man borrows money from his wife and then he divorces her, she can't collect the money, because it's a way for again, it's a way for, why did he borrow? Sorry, let's go back. Right, the husband can say, can I borrow $1,000? And then afterwards, she says, okay, now give me back my $1,000. And he says, no, I borrowed the money because really it was my money and you stole it from me. So I asked to borrow it, but it's not really that I borrowed. It's not really a loan. It was just a way for me to get my money back from you. But again, and really, the Gemara says that the only reason that he would borrow money from her is because of this loan. Because really, the husband wouldn't want to borrow money from his wife, because right, people don't want to get into a lender-borrower relationship if they don't have to. If the wife buys a field from the husband, he's allowed to eat from the produce that is in the field. Sorry. Or no, he really wanted to give her the land. If he really wanted to give her the land, he cannot eat from the produce of the field. Or, right, again, we can say that he's never allowed to have the produce from her land. And then the Gemara says that the law is that he is allowed to eat the produce from the field that the wife bought from the husband. Let's say she has money hidden away. She isn't, she cannot acquire the field because maybe, again, it's a trick for the husband to get his money back, right? It seems that there are cases where the wife maybe steals money from the husband, and the only way that he feels he can get the money back is by selling her a field, right? So he says, I'll give you this field, just give me the money. So she gives the money, and then he says, nah, just kidding. I didn't really want to sell you the field. I just wanted my money back. But if the money is not hidden away in a, in a offshore account, but it's in her regular account, so then we say that she didn't steal the money from the husband. Therefore, when she buys the field, it's a valid acquisition, and the field is hers, and the husband can eat the produce that is on the field. Also, the Gemara tells us that a person should not take a deposit from a woman who is married, because again, she might give, the clock from her living room, and that's probably the husband's. So we don't want her to steal things from her husband. Therefore, you shouldn't take a deposit from the wife. So too, you shouldn't take a deposit from slaves or from children, right? We assume that they don't really own enough property or items, and therefore, if you make them bring in a deposit, they're probably going to steal it, right, either from their parent or from the master. And if you do take this deposit, we suspect that it was probably stolen. And therefore, if you do have it, so then you need to return it. And if the wife dies, so then return it to the husband or to the master if it was from the slave. Daf 52 tells us that if you took a deposit from a child, so then you can invest it. And if the child dies, you give it back to the heirs, whoever is going to be inheriting from the child. If a wife, before she was going to die, says, the money that I have in my account, it's really my husband's, then when she dies, you take the money and you return it to the husband, right? And the Gemara says here that in general, we believe people on their deathbeds. If you don't believe them and you suspect that they're lying, so then you can override whatever request they asked of you. And we were talking about taking a deposit from a child. What do you do? What's the investment? So the Gemara says you buy a Torah scroll, a Sefer Torah, with the deposit from the child. A father and a son, we learned last week, cannot make a Chazaka on each other's property. Again, the assumption is that the son is allowed to be on the father's property and the father is allowed to be on the son's property. Even if the sons grew up, you're still not allowed to make a chazaka. Or another opinion is if they live in separate homes and they have separate, businesses and farms, so then they can make a chazaka on the other's land, because again, you care who's on your land. Therefore, if you let someone on your land, it must be because they own it. If a person is allowed, and now the Gemara says, if a person in general is allowed on your property, those people cannot make a chazaka on the property, right? So let's say you have a next door neighbor and you say to her, anytime you want to, plant some vegetables in my garden, feel free to come into my garden and plant vegetables. Now, if everybody knows that you let her do this, after 3 years, she can't say, oh, look, I own this vegetable garden or I own this house because I've been planting, right? So if everyone knows that you allow that person onto your field, they cannot make a chazaka. Let's say there's a group of brothers and one of the brothers is managing the father's estate. The father passed away. The one brother is managing the estate for the rest of the brothers. So he has a document that only has his name on it, because again, he's the manager. And then he says, I'm going to claim that this document proves that, the house is really mine. So what happens? He needs to prove that the house is really his. Or another option is that the brothers have to bring proof that it isn't his, right? And now the Gemara is going to discuss who has the burden of proof, the managing brother or the other brothers. The Gemara explains that things that are usually rented out, this is something else, we'll get back to the brothers in a minute, but things that are usually rented out, let's say a person has, this item, we don't believe them to say that it's really theirs, right? Because right, let's say you say, can I borrow, I don't know, a mixing bowl from you? So if that's something that people lend, you can't come around now and say, oh, that mixing bowl is mine. How do you know it's in my house? No, you borrowed it, so it doesn't prove that it's yours. But if you have it and you claim it's yours, you need to prove that it's yours. Therefore, let's go back to the brother case. If every expense is like covered, if every expense is shared, right, and everybody gets money, from the estate, then the first brother is the manager is the one who has to prove that when something is his. But if they each get a stipend, right, every month, they get a check, and then they each get to spend it individually, then the other brothers need to prove that, the house is really theirs and not the managing brother. What does it mean to bring proof? So the Gemara says you need to bring witnesses, or you can bring a document that needs to be certified in court. So now the Gemara gives a similar case of a widow who manages the estate for the children. She needs to bring proof if something is just hers. You don't necessarily believe that she wouldn't steal from the orphans, and therefore she needs to bring proof. If there is a counterclaim, so then you can't make a chazaka without 3 years. Remember, we said you need 3 years to make a chazaka. So the Gemara says that's only if there's a counterclaim, right? If you remember last week and the week before, we always had the owner coming to the land and saying, hey, what are you doing on my land? And the person says, what are you talking about? I bought it from you, right? And I've been here for 3 years. Now, if a person gave a gift or got the land from a convert who doesn't have any heirs, right? So nobody to inherit him, or brothers who split the estate, you don't even need 3 years to create a chazaka. How do you acquire the land? You have to do an act of acquisition. What does that mean? You have to either lock the property, you have to put up a fence, or maybe break down a fence that was there. These are 3 actions that are minimal, and that shows that you own the property. But, right, if the buyer does one of these acts in front of the owner, so then it's valid, even if he didn't pay for it yet. Because if the owner is allowing him to, lock the door, put up a fence, it must be because he, it must be because he has the rights to the property. If you don't do it in front of the owner, so then the owner needs to say, okay, you can go and acquire the land. Let's see this, now we're on Daf 53. If you're giving land as a gift, again, the owner needs to say, go and acquire it. Rav holds that people are generous when they give a gift, and therefore, maybe you don't even need to say, go and get it. Maybe as soon as I say, this land is yours, that's it. I assume you're going to go get it. Okay. To acquire something that you bought, you need to do something minor to the property. If before someone could, okay, so what is minor? So let's say beforehand, right, when you bought it, someone could, let's say there was a fence, but they could climb over the fence, and you fixed the fence so that now it's hard to climb over it. So then that's enough of an act, and the property becomes yours. Let's say there was a hole in the fence that you could crawl through, and you made it bigger, and now it's easy to get through the fence. That is a valid act of acquisition. Let's say you put a stone in the wall, or you took out a stone from the wall. That's also enough. But if he did this because there was so now the Gemara explains, why did you put the stone in the wall or take it out? If you did it because there was like a river that was overflowing and you wanted to prevent a flood from going into the land and you saved it, that's not an act of chazaka. That's an act of preventing damage. And we know that you're supposed to prevent damage from everybody's field, not only from your own. So that doesn't prove ownership. But if the stone helped with irrigating the field, so then it's a valid chazaka. Again, it's a positive action for the field. It's not that you're preventing something from happening. Okay, let's say you have two ownerless fields with a border in the middle. If you make a chazaka in one field, you only get that field. If you did an action in one field in order to acquire the other field, so then you don't get anything because you didn't do the chazaka in the field that you want, and the field that you want isn't where you are, so you don't acquire anything. But if you do a chazaka in the field that you want, and you intend to acquire the boundary and the other field, maybe that works. The Gemara says teku, we're not sure. If you did a chazaka on the boundary, again, the Gemara asks, can you get both fields? And again, the answer is teku, we're not sure. Okay, now let's say you have two houses, one inside the other. So there's like an inside house and an outside house. And the inner house the person who lives in the inner house has to go through the outer house to get to his house. So, but the outer house doesn't have any rights to the inner house. So it's the same thing with the fields. If you did a chazaka, meaning you did an action to the outer house, so then you get the outer house, not the inner one. If you did a chazaka to the outer one only to get the inner one, it doesn't work. And if you do a chazaka on the inner one, you only get the inner and not the outer one. But if you wanted to get the inner one and the outer one, and you said, like, I'm doing a chazaka on the inner one to get both, then it does work. Okay, let's say a person built a house on a property that was ownerless, right? It was hefker. Another person, then he builds the house, and then another person comes by and he puts up the doors, right? So the first guy went to sleep and he wakes up, and when he wakes up, it turns out that somebody put doors on the house. The person who put the doors on the house acquired the house. Because he's the one who locked the door, basically. If a person finds a house on an ownerless property and he put some plaster on the wall, or he painted a little bit on the wall, so then he acquires it, and it has to be a certain amount, an amma. But if he does that, he acquires it. If a person puts down a mat and he lies down on the floor of this house, again, he acquires the property, because basically the land is like holding him up. And if the land is holding him up, he acquires it. It's the same thing with a slave. If you want to buy a slave, how do you buy a slave? What act of acquisition can you do? So if the slave serves the person, right, the master, it shows that he was bought. So that is the kinyan, that is the acquisition. Or if he lifts him up, so now the Gemara says, who's lifting who up, right? So if the slave lifts the master, so that for sure works. But if the master lifts the slave, it does not work. Or maybe it does work, and that is how you would acquire the slave. Okay, da 54. If a person dropped a seed into the ground, that's not enough of an action to acquire a field, right? Even though you can say you were planting it, it's still not enough, and therefore you didn't acquire it. Because again, he didn't dig the hole and he didn't cover it up. And if it grows, it just grows on its own. So it's not a chazaka. If you trimmed a tree to improve the tree, that is an act of acquisition. If you just did it to feed your animal, that does not make a chazaka. And now the Gemara gives a lot of different cases, right? So if you swept the land, right, like you straightened it out to improve the land, that's a chazaka. But if you did it just to clear the land, to prepare it, the same thing as if you clear the land in order to prepare it, so that's also a chazaka. If you opened a fence to let the water in, that's going to improve the land, that is a chazaka. And you need to make a chazaka in the regular way, right? Again, if you're going to trim the tree, you have to trim it on both sides. If you just trim it on one side, it's showing that you just want the wood and you're not doing it to make the tree better. Let's say a field has very clear boundaries. If you dig in one corner, you acquired the whole tree. Or no, you only get the corner that you dug in. And if the field isn't marked, you need to plow 2 rows. And as long as you plow 2 rows, then it is a chazaka. And you acquire the whole field. Let's say you have, so now the Gemara makes a statement, but then it's going to clarify the statement. So the statement is the property of a non-Jew is like the desert. Now, what does that mean? Ownerless. Now, it doesn't mean you can just walk into anybody's property and take it, but it's a very specific case. Okay. The case is that a non-Jew sold the property to a Jew who paid him for the property. Now, the property isn't his yet because the Jew didn't do any act of acquisition on the property. Remember, in the secular world, in the non-Jewish world, when you buy something, you own it. That's the end. In Judaism, we say it's not about paying the money. I mean, you also have to pay the money, but it's about actually acquiring the item. So again, that could be by lifting it up. It could be by putting it in your bag. It could be by taking it home. But just paying for it isn't enough. But what's the case here? The non-Jew sold the property to a Jew. The Jew paid for it. He didn't do an act of acquisition yet. And then what happens? If anybody comes along and does an acquisition to the land, then it becomes theirs, right? It's as if it's ownerless, because from the perspective of the non-Jew, the money works. So that's it. It's not his anymore. But from the perspective of the Jew, it's not his till he acquires it. And then the Gemara says, wait a minute, but that's not the secular law, right? We have the concept of, in Aramaic, the concept is dina de malchuta dina, right? The law of the land is what we follow, right? So you need to follow the law in the place that you live, and therefore you do acquire the land, and someone can't just jump in there and take it if you didn't do an act of acquisition. Okay, so now we have a story of Chazaka versus a document, right? So then who gets it? The person with the Chazaka gets the land. Because again, the person says, I've been here for 3 years. Or maybe it's a different situation, because the official owner, and here we're going to get into the concept of taxes. If the official owner of the land didn't pay the tax on the field, the law was in Bavel that if somebody else comes and pays the tax, they own the land, right? Therefore, anybody who pays the tax and has a chazaka, that person gets the land. And here the Gemara tells a lot of stories of people who bought the land from a non-Jew, and then another person came and did an act of acquisition, so then he gets the land. Or maybe he only gets the small area that he dug. Or no, he gets the whole land. Okay, hold on. I see that Ilanit asked a question. 1 second. Okay, how does the property have to be advantaged as a field or an empty house for one to be able to acquire it? The owner has to be gone for at least 3 years. Yes, meaning here it is. You get to this property and you don't see anybody. You work the land and nobody said anything, meaning the owner or the neighbor didn't come and say, hey, what are you doing on Reuben's land? This is Reuben's land. And you're like, no, I bought it. Again, don't forget, you need to claim that you bought it or you got it as a gift, right? We don't believe that in squatters' rights. We don't believe that if you were just there, you get to take it. Again, if it's ownerless property, you can take it. Whoever gets there first gets it. Here we're talking about it's owned property, but you're claiming that you bought it. Okay, so now let's get back to the taxes. So the Gemara says on Daf 55, one, you need to keep the law of the land, right? You can't just say, oh, we're Jews, we have a separate set of laws. You're not allowed to do that. Two, if you want to own land in Persia, you need to be on the land for at least 40 years. If you thought 3 was a lot, the Gemara says that in Persia, you needed to be there for 40 years. And the third thing that the Gemara teaches is that wealthy heirs own land as long as they pay the property tax. Again, if you can't pay the property tax, then anybody who pays the property tax can take the land. Now, this is not the same thing as what's called the head tax, right? Head tax is every person is obligated to pay a tax. That's per person, not based on the property. Or no, the Gemara says maybe everything is on lien, right, is connected to the head tax as well. And therefore, if someone pays the head tax for you, you can take, again, if somebody pays head tax for Ruvain, you can now take Ruvain's property. So then the Gemara says, how can the firstborn ever get double of his portion? Again, it seems that there's always going to be an issue of paying the taxes and all of this. So we would say no. All property of the estate is on lien to the tax, and therefore it's not seen as free. And that's a problem because how can then the firstborn get his inheritance? So the Gemara says, no, it must be that the father already paid the taxes. Therefore, everything that's on the estate is free and able to be taken by the firstborn. Okay, a person who doesn't work or learn must also pay the taxes. Now, let's say the townspeople decide to pay for him. They say, oh, look, he doesn't really make money, so we'll pay for him. He needs to pay them back. But if the government lets him not pay, so then it's as if God helped him and he does not have to pay back the people in the town. Okay, so now we're going to discuss, we mentioned a field that has a boundary marker. So the Gemara discusses what this boundary marker is. So if a field has a boundary, maybe it's empty land, or it has a chatzav growing on it. The chatzav was a plant that grew straight up and straight down. And since the time of Yehoshua, of Joshua, they used it as boundary markers for fields because it was very clear where the line was. So these things divide the field of a convert or anybody else for that matter. But they do not divide the field for pe'ah, which is when you have to leave the corners of your field for the poor, and for tum'ah, for impurity. Or maybe it does count. And now the Gemara is going to explain. Pe'ah, you need to leave the fork, you need to leave a corner of your field for the poor people. Now, if you have a very large field and it's all one field, so you leave a corner and that's the end. But if it's divided into two, now you have to leave two corners because you have two fields. Again, what divides the field for pe'ah? If you have a river running through it, or a large puddle, or if a public or private road goes through it, or a path, that creates a separation. And then you need to set a separate corner aside for pe'ah. When we're discussing impurity, tum'ah, so the Gemara explains that let's say you have a valley in the winter. A valley here means, I mean, it could also literally mean a valley, but it means like fields away from the city where a lot of people don't walk, and especially in the winter. If there's impurity over there in that valley, so then if you're not sure if you walked in that area and you're not sure if you walked over the body, when we're in doubt in a public area, we assume that you are still pure. If you're in doubt in a private area, we assume that you're impure. Therefore, the valley in the winter, people don't usually walk through it. Therefore, it's seen as a private area. Therefore, if you're not sure, you're probably, then the law says that we assume that you are impure. But if you don't even know if you walked through that field, so then it's a double doubt. In Aramaic, it's called, or Hebrew, it's called a speka. The word safek means doubt. We're not sure. And now we have a double one. So it's a speka. So with a speka, if you're not sure if you walked into that field and you're not sure if you walked over the body, therefore, if we have two doubts, then we say that the person is pure. But if it's all considered one field, because again, how are we dividing the fields? If it's seen as one whole field, so then we don't have a doubt if you walked in the field. Obviously, you did walk in the field. Therefore, you would be impure. But if we're talking about the laws of Shabbat, these things are not good dividers for the laws of Shabbat, or maybe they are. And here we talk about the prohibition of hotza'ah, of taking an item from one domain to another. If a person took out 2 half figs, so then they combine and you're liable. Now, if you take it from one domain to another, again, you're liable. But if you take it into 2 separate domains, right, you took half a fig out your front door and half a fig out your back door. So then, and you go in 2 different directions. So then they do not combine. They're seen as 2 separate domains. Daf 56 tells us that you must be divided in between. This needs to be a separate domain, right? Again, like I used the sense of going from the house out the front door and the house out the back door, right? The house is its own domain and it divides those 2 domains, right? But if it's divided by a Carmelit is not as big as the public Reshuta Rabim. So then it's not enough of a divider. Or even Carmelit is seen as a divider, and then you'd still be liable. But if it's maybe a small block of wood, so then you would be exempt. Okay, let's keep going on Daf 56. If no border or chatzav is on the convert's field, as long as the field is called by his name, so then you can acquire it, again, by using small acts. Those of you who are interested to read more about the Chatzav, Shuli Mishkin wrote a beautiful article on the Hadran website, hadran. I think .org.il. You can look at it there. There's an excellent article on the Chatzav. And here the Gemara tells us that Yoshua marked the property in Eretz Yisrael with a Chatzav. And this is between different tribes and on the borders of Israel. And just something fascinating about a Chatzav is that in Israel, it's very popular. It's a very popular plant or flower to learn about. The kids learn about it when they're very young, it's just very cool to see what it looks like. And really, it's something that like all kindergarten children learn about in Israel. Presumably every day it has like a lot of flowers. It seems that every day another flower opens up. So you can look at that. Okay, let's move on to the Mishnah on Daf 56. Here we're going to talk about the concept of Edim Zomemim. I don't know the English term, but these are witnesses that it's not that they are proven to be lying because he says that the gun was black and he says the gun was white. It's not that they contradict each other. Rather, Edim Zomemim is when one set of witnesses testifies about something, right? Bob shot Joe in the parking lot on Monday night. And then what happens? Another set of witnesses come and they say, right? In Hebrew, we say, Imanu hayitem. They say, hold on, Reuven and Shimon. How could you be testifying that Bob shot Joe on Monday night? You were with us at the movies. So if you were with us at the movies, there's no way you could have seen him shoot the other guy. So what happens to these Eidim Zomimim? If we actually believe the second set of witnesses, and the first set, the Eidim Zomimim, the first set has to, they basically get the punishment that they were trying to put on the other person, right? So if they were trying to get him to pay $100, now they have to pay the defendant $100. Okay, so now let's see how Eidim Zomimim fit with Chazaka in 3 years, right? So a pair of witnesses say, this man was on the land for 3 years. Then it turns out that another set of witnesses come and say, how do you know you've been living with us in Russia for the past 3 years? There's no way you could know that you were on the land for 3 years. So now, those witnesses need to pay the owner the value of the field, right? They pay the owner. Let's say we have 3 pairs of witnesses testifying, each for 1 year, right? So I was, right? So they say, I saw, I saw Bob on the field, in 2010, you saw 2011, and another group says 2012, right? So these 3 these 3 sets of witnesses combine, and we establish a valid chazaka, but they split the value of the land, meaning together the 6 people need to pay the owner the value of the land. Okay, let's make it more complicated. We have three brothers who are going to testify, right? 1 for each year. Okay, so 2010, I don't know why I'm choosing those numbers. 2010, 2011, 2012. And one person matches up with each one of the brothers, right? So again, Bob comes to Reuven, and the 2 of them go and testify that they saw the person on the land for year 1. Then Bob again comes with brother number 2 for year 2, and then for year 3. So each brother testifies about 1 year, that equals 3 years. So now we have a problem because brothers cannot join for testimony. Therefore, it's seen as 3 separate sets of witnesses. Therefore, that works to create a chazaka, but for Eidim Zomimim, it's seen as 1 testimony. And therefore, if you want to make it Eidim Zomimim, you need to make it for all, right? All 6, well, it's not 6 people, 3, it's 4 people, right? So all 4 people need to have gone to the movies, and then they'll split the amount that they would need to pay. Okay, that was the Mishnah. So now the Gemara explains. 3 sets of witnesses testify about the person, 1 for each year. So then that's valid to make a chazaka. Or Rabbi Akiva says you need 1 set of witnesses for all 3 years to make a chazaka, and you cannot split it up into 3 separate pairs. Okay, next case. 2 witnesses come, and one of them says a person ate wheat from the field for 3 years, and another person comes and says, no, he ate barley for 3 years. So the question is, can they combine? So the Gemara says they can combine for chazaka, because either way, he was on the land for 3 years. Okay, you cannot make a chazaka on testimony if one witness says, I saw him on the land for year 135, and another witness says, I saw him on the land on year 246. They do not combine, and therefore it's not valid. But with the case of wheat and barley, again, we're talking about the same 3-year period. Therefore, it does combine and it works. Okay, and the Gemara adds, by the way, people don't pay attention to the difference between barley and wheat, and therefore that is valid. Okay, back to the case with the 3 brothers, down 57, right? The brothers, a different case. A brother of a witness that's no longer alive, plus another person can come to authenticate a witness's signature, a witness's signature on a document. The Gemara says, no, that is not valid because here it's the brother of the witness plus another person, and they're authenticating that signature. It's not enough, and it doesn't work. Okay, next Mishnah on Daf 57. To establish a chazaka on the owner's property, what do? Right? If you just put an animal on the property or an oven or a chicken or manure, that's not enough of a chazaka. So even if you did this 3 times, it doesn't mean that you can keep doing it. Now here, in this case, it's different than what we've been discussing before, because before we were talking about acquiring the field, meaning you're saying, no, this is mine. Here, we're saying, if I do an act 3 times, can I continue doing that act, right? So if I don't know, hang my laundry on your property. I don't know, you have better sun. So I hang my laundry on your property. Now, if you don't care, so you don't say anything, so you can keep doing it. But if you care, what are you going to do? The second you see it, you're going to go outside and say, excuse me, get your laundry off of my property, right? And as soon as that happens, you have to take it off and you're not allowed to do it again. However, let's say you build a big wall, right? That's at least 10 tefachim high for your animal on the property, or for your oven, or you made a place, like you dug an extra place for the manure, and the owner of the property didn't say anything. Again, he has to see it. If he didn't say anything, so then it's a chazaka, and that works. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to explain. If you can do this action of acquisition for a certain act of acquisition to acquire a convert's property, again, the convert dies, he doesn't have any heirs. So if you can do a certain action and it's a good enough acquisition, if you do it on someone else's property, you can continue doing it because it seems that they don't care. But if not, then again, if it doesn't affect acquisition, then it's not enough of a chazaka for your neighbor. But the truth is there are differences, right? Like plowing, if you plow a field, it becomes yours. And if you eat the produce, it's not necessarily yours because maybe you just have permission to do that. Therefore, maybe we're talking about partners who own the rights to the property, to the same courtyard. They can both use it. But if you start building walls, if the other partner doesn't say anything, so then it must be that he says it's okay, and you can continue doing it. Or maybe we're talking about the back of the house, not the front of the house. Maybe people don't really care about these parts, the parts of the house. and therefore maybe it would be okay. Let's say two partners make a vow to not benefit one from the other. You can't even enter the courtyard. So here it shows that people do care about the courtyard. So the Gemara says you're right. When we're dealing with monetary things, people don't always object to them being on the property. But when we're talking about something that is asur, it's forbidden because you made it forbidden because of your vow. So then people are more stringent and then they will care. Therefore, if they don't say anything, it shows that you can continue to do it. Okay, even gratuities are forbidden with vows against benefit, right? You can't just like do some bonus thing. If you can't have benefits from something, you can't benefit from it. Now, partners can prevent each other from doing things in the courtyard, except for laundry, right? You're not allowed to prevent someone from doing laundry because the Gemara tells us in the middle of Daf 58, it is not modest for women to go down to the river and to do the laundry at the river. Therefore, they're allowed to do it in their courtyard, even if the neighbor doesn't like it. And therefore, if a man is walking by and sees a woman who's not appropriately dressed, he should close his eyes if there's no other way to walk. Since we're talking about being pious and covering your eyes, the Gemara continues, and modesty. And I think that this is fascinating because most of the time when people think of the word modesty, they think about women, right? What women should wear, what women should speak like, act. But the next line in the Gemara says, how should a Talmid Chacham, a sage, a wise man, a holy, learned man, how should he behave? He must be sanua, he has to be modest. What does that mean? He needs to wear his tunic very long so that you can't see his feet when he's walking barefoot. And again, the tunic needs to be either very long or it should be opaque so it's not see-through. And you should wear a long outer cloak to cover your clothing. And your table should be mostly covered, and you put your food on the exposed part of the table so that the tablecloth doesn't get dirty. And it seems that in those days they used the tablecloth like napkins, so you don't want it to spill with food all over. Therefore, you put your food on the other side of the table. And the same thing with the position of the hook that was on the side of the table. You have to be careful that kids are not going to play with it and that nobody gets hurt. So again, I'll just end with one last line. It says, a Talmid Chacham, how do you know a Talmid Chacham? If you look under his bed and he has one pair of shoes, right? A pair of shoes if it's the summer months or another pair of shoes for the winter months, but that's the only thing under his bed. But somebody who is not as committed to Torah, if you look under their bed, it's a big storage house. And therefore, it's interesting, and maybe cleanliness is close to godliness. Modesty, I thought it was just really, really fascinating. Want to wish everyone a good week and Shabbat Shalom, even though we have a few days till Shabbat. Again, sorry if this was confusing and some people missed the live share. Be'ezrat Hashem, next week we will be back to our regular day, and wishing everyone a great week. Ilanit, do you have any questions?
Yes, a comment, the Adim Zomamim.
Yes.
In Art Scroll, they said Zomamim is plotters, those who would plot.
Okay.
Plotters.
Okay.
Makes me think also maybe of conspirators.
Okay. I like that.
So
I like that.
Yeah, so when I saw they used that word, I put it in the chat, so it's going to be there for people to
Okay.
see later. And also that property tax rule was amazing because we have the same thing going on this very day in the United States where you can acquire a house by paying the property tax. There's a little wrinkle there, of course, because, if it's pre-owned by the bank already, and then they're going to offer it for that kind of thing or whatever. But the thing is just that exists, that one can
Wow.
just pay property tax and you have the house. I think that's
Wow.
amazing. And to know it's so ancient. Wow.
Fascinating. Fascinating. I never knew that. That is really fascinating.
Yes, you have to
Wow.
be very, very careful
Wow.
about to keep your deed that you actually pay your taxes, or somebody else will just
Wow.
pay the taxes for you and they've got your house.
That is crazy. Crazy. Wow. Okay. Wow. Thank you so much. Have a great week. And Be'ezrat Hashem, see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.